I've always liked the rehabbing because it's kind of a creative outlet. I have this artistic side. I like seeing this house go from this really ugly thing to this beautiful thing that someone else is going to get to enjoy. I love the strategizing about how is this demographic of buyer going to live in this house and what can we do to make this the most attractive thing for them. Part of flipping is like, we don't even flip our own houses sometimes. We get calls from agents to say, look, our seller wants this much money. They really need to end up with this much money. They're not going to get it in the condition it's at. Can you help my seller flip their own house? And then we'll do that. And that has accounted for a third to a quarter of our business since I got back into business. It's just helping other people flip there and using my experience to like what you should do.
I am Christina Suter, and this is the Real Estate Breakthrough Show, where we talk about the reality of real estate, the mindset you need in order to face the reality of what it is, and tips and tricks to get you moving forward in investing. I am your host, Christina Suter. All right, so Robert, tell us about your new mastermind and what you're up to, because that's really what we're here to focus on.
Well, what we figured out is I get a lot of questions from people that are wanting to get into the business or they're already in the business, but they really want to expand into the flipping business a little bit more. And the common theme that I hear is that they've taken a course, they've paid just, a lot of money for these courses, and then they're afraid to take action or they don't know action, like which action to take. And so what we developed is essentially a hour a day, Monday through Friday coaching call where it's just live interaction. And we answer all the questions that are holding you back, right? And so we try to go through, we do training, we do, teach you everything about flipping. But if there's questions that come up where, let's say they're out and they're talking to a real estate agent and, the agent asked them a simple question that maybe the seminar that they attended didn't cover. I've had questions as simple as an agent had asked a newbie investor asked him, who's your developer? And he didn't know how to answer that question. And so the agent didn't give him the deal. And I said, the agent was basically testing you to see if you were experienced or not. He's like, well, what should I have said? And I said, you should have said, you're the developer, right? They want to know that they're talking to someone who's a decision maker. You could have said, my partner handles that part. I handle the acquisitions part. You could have said a lot of different things, but he got stuck. It was frozen. And then he didn't get that deal. And it was a good deal, by the way. And so just simple questions like that come up that are holding people back, I find. Other things where they get into it and they've learned how to assess repairs. And in fact, one of the calls tomorrow, we're doing a field trip to a property that one of the students has under contract, and we think it's kind of a unique property in Santa Monica. And we're just going to take a field trip there, walk it, and then develop a scope of work for it with actual costs of what things are costing today. So from that standpoint, I think we look at it and it gives people a little bit more confidence to have that. Out of all the people that we've got on the call, we've grouped them up into teams so that they can, and someone's got a little bit more construction experience, someone's a realtor, so they've got that experience, and try to help them kind of build a team to go out and really get their either first deal or expand on the transactions that they're doing now.
I cannot tell you how many times people have walked up to me at my meetings and asked me sort of like on the side, can I ask you a quick question about? And the most common questions are either, how do I wholesale this house or get successful in my wholesaling? Or how do I flip this and get successful at flipping it? Christina, can you come look at it? Christina, can you answer these questions for me? Christina, how do I get these deals? How do I handle acquisitions? Whether it's acquisitions for flipping or acquisitions for wholesaling. How do I handle these acquisitions? And it's funny because it's like, to me, it's funny because it feels like they're blind. I'm like, well, have you taken a course? Yeah, I've taken a course. Did you do all the protocol? Yeah, I did all the protocol. Is it working? No, and I don't know why it's not working. And I paid $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 for this coursework, and now I can't seem to implement it in a way that's actually working. What am I supposed to do? And I'm like, well, did they include consulting with your program? Right? And because it's the teaching what to do, it can be done all day long. I can't tell you how many times I've said this to people, and both clients of mine, students of mine, people I'm helping to create curriculum with. You can teach what to do all day long. The real question becomes, how do I do it? I, the human being that's actually engaged in this process, how do I do it? And the how to do it for you as an individual is where the real rubber meets the road. It's where the juice is. in being able to take something, a system you've learned, a system you studied, and really being able to implement it because you understand the instrument which you are.
Right. And building on that, I think what happens is that there's a certain amount of just insecurity and a lack of knowledge that happens. And I benefited from, I was a hard money lender for 17 or 18 years. We've been a part of, we were trustee sale buyers at the time as well. I've been a part of, I say 10 or 12,000 flips at this point. It's my 35th year in the business. And I've had my contractor's license, so it kind of, I have all this knowledge that I feel like, okay, as I'm getting closer to retiring, I got taught by mentors. I got taught by doing things, action based, really developed because I had mentors that were like, go do this, right? And it's okay that you screw that up. Here's what happened, and here's what went wrong, and then you learn from that. And so I've been, listen, I've made certainly my fair share of mistakes, right? As I'm sure we all have, right? But you learn, there's lessons from that. And if I can keep other people from making those mistakes, fantastic. But more importantly, it becomes easier and easier to spot opportunity the longer you're in this business, because you see things that, like, okay, even simple things like when we were at trustee sale, we would track the deals that we got outbid on. Why did somebody else see more value than we did? What did they end up selling it for? What did they do to the property? All of these things come into play because it's kind of homework. So you have to be pseudo obsessed with the business in order to be successful, because you're really looking at it from so many different viewpoints and vantage points that there's more than just one way to do a flip. And when you're in the seminars, they're going to teach you, hey, this is look for the highest and best use. But the less sexy part of flipping is sometimes you don't do all of the repairs to it. Sometimes you get it to a point where it's financeable and you don't sell it for the top dollar, but you make a higher yield. Maybe you make less dollars, but you're in and out of, let's say, 3 deals in a year or 4 deals in a year instead of 1 or 2 deals in a year. And so, understanding how to monetize the flips is super important. And really understanding the construction side, the rehab stuff, all of that becomes really very, very important. I've seen a lot of good deals that people buy and they mess up the deal in the construction phase because either they hire the wrong people, they over demo up front, and they didn't have the cost analysis done up front. So they didn't realize, like, oh wow, I'm demoing too much, and it's going to cost this much to put it all back together, right? And I mean, that's a key part. You're allowed.
Oh, yeah, no, I know this deal. I'm like, I gave him $36,000 to the contractor and he demoed, and then it would cost us $75,000 to put the whole thing back together again. And I'm like, dude, it was a $36,000, demo and rehab. Like, what's the $75,000? I mean, so so yes, I'm laughing because I recognize what you're talking about, and that it is so easy, and the advantage of having somebody who can, like, look over your shoulder and just go, wait a minute, Christina, like, you need to sit on your contractor. He needs to not demo everything, right? Like, it never occurred. Okay, I know this is, Robert, you're going to laugh at me. Okay. At the time, it never occurred to me to have to sit on my contractor during demo. I'm like, it seems to me like demo would be demo, right? It never occurred to me. And then I'm walking in, I'm like, where'd all the drywall go? I'm like, excuse me, I'm so
So
confused. Like,
I
this
I
is just
I have an
demo.
electrician. Yeah, I have an electrician that one of the guys, he'll make the smaller hose and he takes the time to fish the lines through, so it minimizes demo. I have another guy that hates fishing lines through, and he's going to remove all of the drywall to install his thing, and he doesn't care that it costs you more money, right? And so, but these are conversations that you have to have with people so that they understand the expectation of what they're going to do, right? And it's simple, like you hire an electrician, it's like, hey, listen, we want to rewire this. Great. One guy is going to cost you more, even though their bids might be the same, because he's going to demo a lot more, and then you've got to put it back together, right? And so these are all the conversations that I think people, they miss sometimes. We go through and we spray paint the house. We use different color cans, and we go through and it's like, okay, this is what's going to be demoed. This is where you can demo, right? We have the demo crew that comes through, and they've already opened the walls up for electrical, plumbing, and we have demo do all of that up front, so that you're not paying. It's cheaper to pay a demo guy to demo than it is for your plumber to demo, who's charging you $100 an hour or whatever he is for his demo. So if you understand like what you're going to do and and you have the full scope of work up front, then these are ways that you can save money through the process. So, experience has kind of taught me some of that. Um, the management of the ordering, all of these things come into play. But more importantly, what we put together is basically Monday through Friday, starting at 10 a.m., going to, we say 11 a.m. Honestly, most of the times we're going to like 11:30. Basically, we developed the calls to run at least an hour a day. Right now, we've been doing like once a week. We've been doing a site visit if the people are local here in California. If not, they can watch the whole site visit on the Zoom, ask the same questions. But there's like a toolkit that I always carry when I'm inspecting properties, and and so we go through and we look for the things that maybe sometimes can be glossed over if you're just walking through a property, right? And that way, when people are walking through a property, they learn a little bit more of what the potential pitfalls of that particular transaction might be. And it is definitely, especially here locally in LA. It's not like we have a lot of tract homes. They're really individual. They're old war homes. They've been modified throughout the years, and and it seems like every deal is a little bit differently. There's different things that you do to it and what have not. But it also depends on like the demographics, which is something that we go through. It's look, the demographic for your target buyer is this, right? And if that's the full rehab, great. If it's also not the full rehab, then the demographic might be the entry level buyer that can't afford the full rehab in that neighborhood. And maybe you make more money that way, right? But it's not as sexy. So, I post a lot of the full rehabs that we do. I don't post a lot of the ones that are, not the sexy rehabs because people they're like, oh, you did a crappy rehab. It's like, okay, but if I did a full rehab, A, I couldn't have done this deal, and B, we wouldn't have been out as quickly, and we sold an affordable home, right? We don't pretend it's fully rehabbed. We acknowledge what it is, but that's part of investing, right? There's more than one way to invest. And I think that's the key part that a lot of the seminars miss, is that really they're going to show you rehabbing, and they go through either the light rehab or whatever the concept is of whoever that quote unquote guru is, right? And that's what you're learning. So I got the benefit is that we had so many loans that we were doing. I watched all of the different rehabbers rehab with their own style and how they morphed throughout the years, and what how their business has changed throughout the years of their experience. And most of them, I can tell you, grow out of flipping and grow into development. And the reason is that it's much easier to actually build a house from scratch because all of the systems are the same for every single house versus all of the questions that you have in a rehab. It's like, hey, okay, we opened up the wall. Here's how this ties up. And you wanted to remove this wall. But here's what we have to do. We need engineering for this, or what do you want to do going forward? You don't get those questions with new construction because you're.
And yeah, if you work the whole thing out, I mean, it's literally a map. There's literally a map. It's called a set of plans, and there's literally a map. And then you can call out an unusual amount of things on the map, all the way down to where you want every electrical plug, right? Be on those plans. You don't have to have them on your plans, but you put them on your plans, and you've got even less possibility for confusion or quote unquote mistakes while building. And also, well, I guess one of the things about rehabbing and both ground up construction is that people don't always know exactly what it originally was going to look like. So you still have a little bit of fudge room if you need to. But I guess like I was about to say, the person that I used to flip with, he always did 100% flip. He did 100% of construction, always went all the way down. This is not the guy the contractor I walked in and said, hey, what'd you do with all it wasn't even drywall, it was plasterboard. What'd you do with all the plasterboard? But he always went all the way down. And those are the only things that he would really buy, is something where he could go all the way down, because he knew he didn't flip the other way. Whereas I know a guy who worked in Cleveland, Ohio, which is older homes, lower in market, right? The Cleveland itself, if you look at Cleveland City, the whole city itself is a lower in market, not necessarily horrible, but just lower in. And you can't do that. You can't take it down to studs. You can't afford to be able to resell the house if you're going to do that. And I remember seeing the same in Detroit. So I flew out to Detroit and I was looking at all these beautiful old Victorians, and the amount of work they needed to get them really pristine, way outside the value of what they could resell for, probably almost twice as much. I would have to sell for twice as much as what its actual value is. And I didn't do it. I just didn't do it. I just walked away from it. I didn't have anybody to be able to say, hey, Christina, by the way, here's how you do that. Here's how you do this minimum rehab on a Victorian house that's in the middle of a city that isn't ready for that price point.
Well, I'll tell you, I did some transactions in Texas. We did some in St. Louis. We did some in Florida. And I will say that every area, I always pretend like I know nothing because really you know nothing. And I'll give you an example of a deal that we did in San Antonio. I flew out, I did the inspection, and I remember seeing that this thing is sitting on tree trunks. And I'm like, this house has no foundation. And the broker looks at me, he's like, what's wrong with the foundation? And I'm like, it's literally sitting on tree trunks. He starts laughing. He goes,
Oh,
we call
really?
that cedar
Cedar
post
Post
foundation.
Foundation, huh? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I said, well, what about the earthwood contact with the termites and all this stuff? And he goes, well, hey, termites don't eat cedar, and the way it works here, this is normal for us. And I'm like, God, I'm like, with no concerns about. They don't have earthquakes. They don't have, di- right, different set of circumstances there. And their biggest thing was the other thing was like we had during the downturn, we'd foreclosed on a bunch of houses in Dallas. And I walked them, and some of them were fine. And then we went back a week and a half later, or 2 weeks later, and the foundation was off like 3 or 4 inches. I'm like, what the heck happened? And again, the foundation guy's like, is like, yeah, well, we've been having weather recently, is what they call it, and where it goes from extreme heat to torrential rain. And he goes, yeah, this area has a lot of clay. Were you watering your foundation? And I'm like, we water
Because we
plants.
try
What do you
very
mean
hard to
water our
not water our
foundation? Right? He's
foundation
like,
here in
yeah,
California,
you have to
actually.
keep the water. Right. And so, but you have to keep it moist enough, otherwise the clay shifts. He goes, and it happens over the course of like a week. And I'm like, wow. So now we have to fix these like 8 different foundations because we didn't know to water our foundation, you know? And so there's different things like that during winter, like, in other parts of the country, you have to, you know, um, remove all the water when it's going to freeze. Otherwise your pipes will burst, right? Right. But we don't have that issue here in California. It's like, oh, even in Big Bear, it's like, it's not that cold. It's all right. My son lives in Indiana now. And, I looked at the weather and it says 15 feels like three. And I texted him, like, does it feel like three? And his answer was like, oh, frick yeah, it feels like three. It's like minus something. It feels like minus something. My wife sent me a picture of Notre Dame, which is where he goes, and it's like just covered in, it's like all white. And I'm
Right,
like,
beautiful,
man,
well,
it's
especially with
beautiful, but
Southern
it looks
California standards.
miserable too.
So you are
Right.
officially retired, Robert. Like, why are you back active? I'm just saying. You were.
I yeah, I was, I'm back active again. I mean, I've always been doing deals, except for there was a two year period where when basically we Anchor got sold, right, and I had a 2 year non compete. That was a hard non compete, so we couldn't do anything during that period. And then past clients kind of got me back into the business a little by little. We had some exclusions. We could do X amount of deals, which that was great. Um, and I just found that I really like the business and I miss the business. And actually, after when you have this identity for basically more than 2 decades, and then you stop cold turkey. I mean, you go through a little bit of like, okay, well, now what? So I tried a bunch of other things, and when I figured out, it's like I'm not smart enough for a bunch of other things. I'm really smart enough for real estate, right? Like, I mean, this is all I've done, so I know it really well. So that's kind of, so I went back to like what I did, and I've always liked the rehabbing because it's kind of a creative outlet. I have this artistic side. I like seeing this house go from this really ugly thing to this beautiful thing that someone else is going to get to enjoy. I love the strategizing about how is this demographic of buyer going to live in this house, and what can we do to make this the most attractive thing for them. You know, how can we help? We get a lot of Here's another. A lot of people don't know this, right? Part of flip, yeah. Part of flipping is like it's not just like we don't even flip our own houses. Sometimes we get calls from agents to say, "Look, our seller wants this much money. They really need to end up with this much money. They're not going to get it in the condition it's at. Can you help my seller flip their own house?" And then we'll do that, and that has accounted for about a third to a quarter of our business since I got back into business. It's just helping other people flip there and using my experience to like what you should do and how to
It is.
how to
Oh my
manage the
gosh, it
contractors,
is.
which
It
is
is.
the biggest risk for a lot of
I
people.
cannot tell you, and I like like if I could broadcast this, it is managing the contractor to me is the biggest risk. It's the biggest amount of time and effort and focus. It's the biggest place for slippage is in managing the contractor. I remember I was sitting I had gone on vacation. I was sitting in a resort and I was having this conversation with a guy who's like, "Oh yeah, I'm a contractor." And I went, "Great." And he says, "I said, have you ever worked with flippers?" He's like, "Oh, I'm thinking about working with flippers." I said, "Well, let me tell you something about working with flippers. When I'm holding a house up, it's costing me $500 a day to hold that house up. So I always want to have a crew there because your crew is less expensive than my holding cost per day." Right? Like your crew's costing you $300, $400. I'm costing me $500 to hold it up. So you take $500 plus the cost of your crew, that's now $900 I'm having to expend on just one day of getting this sucker done. Right? And he's like, "You mean 5 days a week?" I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "If possible, 2 crews." He's like, "Huh?" And I'm like, "Yeah, because I'm holding up the property at $500 a day. Do the math, right? That's $15,000 a month, right? Like, I need your crew in and out." And he's like, I don't like, I mean, I could just see the look on his face and I could see him settle back into, "Oh, well, you're just crazy, lady." Like, he's like, he just discounted the whole thing and just went, "Well, you're just crazy. Like, it's not really like that." And I'm like, no, in my mind, as soon as I saw his face slip into that moment, I was like, no, it really is like that. And I only know a select few contractors that actually understand that it really is like that. I understand they're caught between their overpromising of all their clients and the amount of crews they have and their capacity to get to each project. But at the same time, you are wasting my money and you're wasting my profit, my return, and you're making this project almost unreasonable if you're not continuing to keep your focus.
I had a client that was probably the most efficient rehabber I'd ever seen. And when we first started doing loans for him, I remember meeting with him, and he was like, the deals were a little tighter, and I'm like, okay, well, how long is this rehab going to take? And he looked at me, and he's like, 27 days. And I said, 27 days. That's pretty exact, right? 27 days, right? When he said that, I'm like, 27 days. I'm like, yeah, we can't chart it out. We know exactly how long. I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, and next deal he had was a bigger rehab. And I asked him the same thing. All right, well, this one, how long is that going to take? And he looked at me, he's like, 27 days. And I'm like, well, this other one that was a light rehab took 27 days. Why is this one you've got to do like way more work? It's also 27 days. He said, yeah, it's 27 days. We have a Gantt it out. And I'm like, I don't, I'm like, I couldn't comprehend what he's talking about. He's like, look, we have a pre-job walkthrough with all of the trades. Why don't you come? So I showed up to this thing, and it was like, yeah, whatever it was, a Tuesday afternoon. It was like a lunch he had. He had a bar, like a taco guy there. All the crews are there, and he gets up on stage. He's got his Gantt chart printed out in large format, and he tells the guys, he's like, look, by the way, there's maybe 60 or 70 people that showed up, right? Like it wasn't. Right. He had all the crews, but he had an electrical crew, a plumbing crew. He had the landscape guys. He had the roof guys. So everything was basically vended out to different vendors. And he's like, look, here, you guys are going to be working on top of each other. If it doesn't work for you, tell me now, because that's what's going to happen. So these are all the people you're going to be working with together. It's crowded. It's not your normal thing, but this has to be done. Like you're doing, he called out one of the guys, he goes, like you're doing the HVAC. You're going to come after like whatever the plumber's name was. He goes, he's going to have this stuff done. He goes, he has to be done on that day. You're scheduling this day. If he's not done on that day, it screws you up, right? And so and he looks at him. He goes, if you're not done on that day, don't come back. You're fired. That's it. And he just tells him, he goes, I don't care if you have to have, if you need to get more people here, right? He's like, look, this is a matter of man hours. So if it's going to take you, and you're planning out like, oh, I need 4 guys, have 5 guys, get done early, right? Have 6 guys, make sure it's done. You meet this timeline. He goes, look, and this is a guy who did a pretty large volume of flips every year. He's like, look, I have more work. We're moving on. There's no reason to delay this one. After this one, you've already got another house scheduled. Go to that one, and that one's going to take you this many days. He goes, but don't miss a deadline with me. I don't want to hear an excuse. I don't care if you're here till midnight because one guy showed up and he was sick or whatever it was. Then stay later. Get it done. Nobody's going to bother you, and he's like, but if you miss it, you're fired. You will never work with our company again. And I was just like everybody was just kind of silent. They're kind of looking at each other, and you could tell the guy, right? But this guy, 27 days, that house was done, and it was like, and I'm like, dang. And you go through the house, and it's kind of an extreme home makeover type like finish. Now, his cost for rehab was higher, right? But where he made it up was in the time, in that $500 a day, right? And so I've tried to replicate that, and you get some guys and all stuff, and you go through the fire, but you have to have so many crews and so many things to really be able to do that type of volume and stand by your gun. We're like, you're fired, you're done, don't. Right. And he would make example of people who
I
were
told
late.
you
It's
from
like,
the
no, don't
beginning.
come
This
back.
is
You're
this is
done.
the
You're done.
requirements. I have
That's it.
three, two or three
You know?
hardcore requirements, and that's it. That is fascinating and makes me want to like go, who is he? Who is he? I want to hire this dude, right? But I'm done flipping. I'm done flipping in LA. I will flip. I will flip. I will flip for rentals. I will flip for my own use. I will not. I will not flip for flipping because it's just too hard. It's too hard a project to sit on. Too many moving parts. Too many people to piss off, including myself. And I don't like living in an environment where I'm inherently going to be pissed. I just don't. I don't have to do that anymore. So here's my question to you. My question to you is, Robert, why go back to work if you're financially free? What's your definition? Really, the question is, what's your definition of financial freedom? If you're choosing to go back to work, I think I have a thought, but I want other people to hear the truth of what it means to live.
Look, I got taught, I was 17 years old when I got started. I was a senior in high school. And like a lot of people don't know that, right? You can't even buy the house, but I got taught for essentially free. I used to go to these seminars that were the free seminar and learn as much as I could. And until I met really my first mentor that was an actual investor, I knew as much as I knew until he showed me like the little nuances of things. And so that's the thought process behind this. It's like, look, you can learn as much as you can learn from learning from the videos or YouTube University or whatever seminar. But until you're out there and you're actually doing it, and unless and you have a community that can help you through all of those little things, it's not gonna work. And so that's kind of what I saw. That I saw just kind of a need. Um, a lot of these people were my clients, and sometimes I think we're going to start a second one that's kind of a real estate 201 or 301 type class, because some of the people that are on the Zoom, they're already flipping, they're doing more things, and really what they want to learn is more efficiency. So, from an efficiency standpoint, I mean, we had to learn a lot because when we were buying a trustee sale, this was 2000 late 2009 2010. And we went the first month we bought like three houses. The next month we bought, I think it was like 10 or 12 houses. And then the next month we bought 30. And we weren't set up for that. So you had to learn how to expand very, very quickly, how to get more crews, how to do all that stuff and go crazy and go through that process. And then people want to know, God, how did you do that? Yeah, well, we pulled our hair out a lot and we worked our asses off. But really the reality is that there is a process that you go through to have that happen. I think from a income perspective, listen, it's always great to have cash flow. And this, we don't charge a lot for this, by the way. It's very, very cheap. It's $250, is what the
A
challenge
month?
costs, but it's daily calls and amounts.
$250 a month.
Listen,
Yeah.
a month,
Totally
yeah.
fair.
So it's
Totally fair.
it's like
Completely fair.
$3 an hour,
$250
right?
a
Like
month
it's the
to get
cheapest
your
thing.
projects working efficiently and online to
I,
have those
I,
questions available that morning. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but the reason is like, I mean, look, I know that some of the people are going to want an investor, and I can be that investor, and I'll partner, and we'll make more money from that. And some of the people just want to learn how do you get your own investors? How do you raise your own money? Great, I'll show you that too, right? But the reality is that you just need someone to bounce things off of sometimes. And the group, whether you're a beginner or you're experienced, a lot of times, when you're in part of this group, others will have ideas that I forgot about that it's been a long time. It's like, well, what about this? I'm like, oh yeah, that was a play in the playbook back in 2012, and it's coming back around. Like there's things that we used to do in the early 2000s that we don't do now because there's moratoriums or what have not. Like we used to take 5 and 6 units and convert them down to four, and you can't do that now because you can't get rid of units because we're in a housing shortage. Right, right. So now, and that's exactly right. So now we look at, okay, how can we add ADUs? How can we do this? How can we do a TIC? How can we do whatever? And you look for ways to add value. So, this is, to answer your question, cash flow is always great. This creates another cash flow. It's not a huge cash flow for me because the reality is that it's just not, but it is a passion project. And, you know, I'm very passionate about real estate. I've always loved it. And I mean, it's just it's all good. It's just I love doing it. We like I mean, reality is I make $1 an hour probably if you really the amount of time that we spend on
It
it.
does.
But
It beats
it's
flipping burgers.
okay.
And also,
It beats
I
flipping
will share with
burgers.
you a little bit of my experience because I think this is the truth of it. Even though I don't think you quite said this, I'll tell you my experience. So when I got quote unquote financially free, I bought my first apartment building in like 2000, I think it was 2001, my first apartment building, and I had enough cash flow because I was a teacher, I was a receptionist. I wasn't replacing a lot of income. Right. So in order to replace my paycheck in a way where I was comfortable, I was able to retire based on the properties, the investments I had, and my first apartment building. Right. That brought enough cash flow for me. Right. A punk kid at the time. And well, I mean, I probably was in my 30s, but still. Here's what I found fascinating was I got really bored and angry in 6 months. In 6 months, I was like, well, this freaking sucks. But I don't want to play golf. I don't want to go swimming. I don't want to vacation all the time. I don't. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I realized that what I loved was being a leader. I loved being a leader. I loved being engaged in a community where I was a leader and could teach, support, and grow the people that were around me. That filled me with joy.
It's very fulfilling to watch other people succeed and that you help them. I think is really great. Someone paid me a great compliment the other day, and and I never really thought about it. And I posted it. I posted the video, but we had a meetup at one of the houses, and one of the attendees started crying, and we're like, okay. And then we're like, we were talking the whole time. I'm like, I should record this. So I started recording it because it was just such a moving thing. And what had happened is she had actually met my contractor on that job like 5 or 10 years earlier while she was working for a print shop. And he said, she wasn't in real estate at all. She worked at a print shop. And she'd asked him, like, what are you doing? Because he was having some shirts custom made for his construction company. And he said, oh, well, this is what we do. But we also flip houses. And, what's going on is we're buying these houses for $1. And she's like, well, how do I do that? How do I? And he's like, gave her his number. He's like, look, someone is basically taught me to do this. I can teach you. And so what they did is they exchanged phone numbers. She lost his phone number. And then she joined our challenge, right? Was here. And she's like, I've been really just kind of praying on it and thinking about like, am I doing the right thing? Should I just stay in my lane with what she does? And and then he shows up and she starts crying. She's like, I that's the problem. Yeah, call. Okay, so let me go back and we'll go back to edit. So so she showed up. Yeah, so she shows up and she's in tears and she said, I guess she'd been looking for a sign and she's looking at Rick and she's like, you probably don't even remember me. And he's like, no, I remember you. And she said, yeah, I've been trying to figure out, am I going in the right direction? And seeing you here, she's like, solidifies that for me that I am going in the right direction and how we can reconnect and all this stuff. And I was like, great. And he looked at her and he goes, you remember what I told you back then? And he remembered the conversation clearly. He said, there were people that were teaching me. And he goes, and it's the guy behind the camera that like taught me how to do it. And he's like, yeah. And I remember, she's like, I remember, how am I ever going to find a house for $1? And what happens in this business is that when you're in the know and you're in the business, there's all these opportunities that come up. And sometimes it's Like with Katrina, there was a natural disaster that required a lot of developers and investors to go in and rebuild that whole area. We're going to have similar things that happen. As many people that are haters for investors out here, there is a need for certain things to happen because that's just the process of it. What she was referring to when she was talking about buying houses for $1 when they expanded LAX, the city of LA said, okay, hey, we'll let you expand LAX, but we don't want you to tear down all these houses and fill up the landfills. And so what they did is as part of the or expansion, they sold all of these houses for $1, but you had to move the house off the lot. And so investors that we were financing were buying all these houses. Of course, the larger the house, the better. And then in the middle of the night, these houses would get moved off. And we had to be there to raise electrical lines and all this stuff. But it's a process and it's an opportunity that comes up, just like there will be opportunities that come up in the future. I get asked this every time the market gets better. It's like, oh, flipping's over. Well, it's been 35 years and it hasn't been over through the downturn, through the upturn. 2009 was a down year. 2010 was a down year. 2011 was a down year. It bottomed out in 2012. More money was made during that time than probably any other time outside of COVID. There was a lot of appreciation that you could see that happen, right? So part of it is being with people that understand how the markets work, what opportunities to look for, when there's certain things to do. And that's, I think, part of the community is that we'll all learn from each other. If I can share some knowledge, great. If people have some questions and they bring up other things, we'll dig in and we'll hopefully use the experience of not just myself, but the other mentors that are part of the group to help the group as a whole really grow. And it's passion. I mean, listen, I don't have a cheap lifestyle, right? So I've always liked that. I wasn't a teacher. Shortly after I got started when I was 17, but I was 21 or 22. I moved to Newport and I was living on the beach, which is also not cheap. And I've always liked that lifestyle. So, it's part of it is just my motivation to help other people live well. And I love watching people succeed. It's really, really rewarding. And it's honestly, it's more rewarding to give than to receive. I don't do well with a lot of compliments I get. Someone calls me, they call me the godfather of flipping. And that just points out I have more gray hair now than when I started. Thanks. Right. But it's also if I can help people along the way, great. And there's some people I've been able to help, and the more the merrier, and it makes me happy. So that's really the motivation behind it. So honestly, the best way to just text us. It's 949 and 949-572-4468. Text us, 30-day mastermind, and we'll send you the link to sign up. You sign up and just jump on the calls and hit the ground running. I mean, don't delay. I mean, honestly, there's such great opportunity out there right now. And it's really, as many people say California is done, it's too high. It's just not true. There are great up. And by the way, let me just tell you, there are 7-figure flips here in LA that you can still get.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. All right. Robert Fragoso, thank you so very, very much. You guys have his phone number. You know how to get a hold of him if you want to join his mastermind. Clearly, he is a wealth of knowledge. He has been at this so long. He is the godfather of real estate, mostly talking about his gray hair, but also his level of experience. And he truly is a resource to you guys. So if you're flipping currently, you have any questions, you're looking to be good at acquisitions, please reach out to Robert and his mastermind. It would be incredibly helpful to you. You will get the traction you're looking for and that you know is missing in the work that you're doing. All right, this is Christina Suter, Real Estate Breakthrough. Thank you so much. Listen for our next podcast.